All right, everyone, welcome back to another Node.js plus Redis project. In this project, we'll be learning about how you can create a simple rate limiter with Node.js and Express. But in this video, I just want to walk you through over how the project works and looks like. So the front end is pretty simple. You can see we get and hit an API endpoint. We have 3 buttons and we have an output for showing what the API is returning. We just set up a few listeners on these 3 buttons. And the function which is called is this hit API every single time, 1, 2, 3. And you can see what we are doing essentially is just performing a fetch request to API 1, API 2, API 3, depending on what button we are hitting. The method is post, and then finally we just convert it into JSON, whatever response the server is sending to us, right? Then finally we append that to output in a text, and that's it. So if you go ahead and take a look, actually this is calls in a minute, not really just calls. So we're going to be changing that. So if you go ahead and take a look inside the backend now, you can see our first line is pretty simple. First route is simple because it's just returns us this index.html document. Then our 3 endpoints here, which are 3 APIs, API 1, 2, 3, all 3 say response okay and calls in a minute as 0, right? And one more thing, this should be actually API 2 and 3, not just API 1 all along. So once we do that, and also on the back end, what we want to do is actually change this to from just return to rest.json all the way down to every single API which we have. All right, so with that being done, let's just go ahead and click on this hit API 1, and you can see we get a response okay, call 0, and we get all the way down. So our next task would be to increment these calls and introduce Redis, and I have rate limiting and all that good stuff. So I'm super excited to do that in the next video. Let's just go ahead and take a look at that in the next one. Hey everyone, welcome back. And in this video, let's just go ahead and take a look at how we can integrate rate limiting with Redis on an Express app and on any single API. So we're going to be doing it raw, bare bones metal. But obviously you can use a package in production. You can use any npm package you want, but I'm going to show you how you can do it in Redis itself. So first things first, for rate limiting, let's stick to just API 1 and then we'll extend it to basically all the APIs. The first thing I want to know is the IP address of the user, right? So how you determine an IP address of the user is in a couple of ways. It depends on if you're using remote proxy or not. So stuff like that depends, right? So if you go ahead and actually console, just get the IP from either the X forwarded for. So this is how you use it if you're sitting in front of a remote proxy like Nginx. And I know we are in fact sitting in front of Nginx for this container codedamn runs in. So we will have a right IP from this, or you can have a request.connection.remote address as well as the property if you're directly sitting across the internet. So you can use these 2 things and you'll be good to go. Now, the next thing is let's just go ahead and actually take a look at our IP. I'm going to just ip.slice 0 to 5 so that we just know that it's working, but not really expose the whole IP address. So I'm going to go ahead and hit API endpoint 1, and you can see that it kind of, gives that IP feel. That's fine. All right, so the next thing I want to do is once we have our IP address, what we want to do is we want to somehow say that, this person has visited this API route. And for the sake of my IP address privacy, I'm just going to go ahead and use the first, let's say 8 or maybe like 9 characters in the IP address, right? So you will get my IP address like this, but ideally you can go ahead and use the full IP address, right? So you can go ahead and do that. That's completely fine. So what we're going to do next is we're going to be storing this thing inside Redis, and we already have a Redis client with us, which we did in the last project. So there's that. And what we want to do is we want to say, first of all, await redis.increment, and then we pass in this IP address, which we have, right? And the property of increment is that if the key does not exist, it'll create it. It'll set it to 0 and then increment it. So you finally get 1, right? If it does exist, it just increments it by 1. So that's pretty handy. So you can just go ahead and say const, requests, and just console.log number of requests made so far. And that could be just requests, right? So there we have it. Now, if I go ahead and refresh this, well, we did not really need to do that, but anyway, if I click on this, you can see we get number of requests made so far, 1, 2, 3, and it will go on and on. So we can pretty much pass this like this. And you can see now, if I go ahead and, just press on this, you can see our calls are now getting incremented, which is progress, right? Which is progress, but this is still not calls in a minute thing, right? But we'll come to that. But for now, we can work on this, right? So we want to say that, hey, if you're making so many request is greater than, let's say 20, then I just want to say return res.status is 503, and, JSON, response error, calls in a minute, and then -1, whatever, or maybe like request as well. Why not? Right? So now if we go ahead and make it all the way to 20, you can see now we start getting response as error and calls as, whatever the calls amount is, right? So this time now your expensive function calculation can go here, your database calls, whatever you're doing, that could happen here at this point, because now you have just stopped the person from actually using your service. Yeah, right? You have rate limited them. So that's how you do rate limiting in a basic sense, but this is obviously an incomplete solution. So we're going to be taking a look at how we can enhance this in the next video. That is all for this one, and I'm going to see you in the next one really soon. Hey everyone, welcome back. And in this video, let's just go ahead and take a look at how we can go ahead and implement the functionality to actually make sure that, there is a cooldown thing happening after some time. So that's pretty simple. If you have used Redis so far, you would understand now that the only thing we need to do is we need to just make sure that we are updating or renewing the expiry date on Redis, right? So you can say await redis.expire, and then you can set expiry to this particular key. So we know this is IP, and then let's say I can say it's 60 seconds, right? And we do this only when request is equal to 1. That means on the first request, whenever the server arrives, we're gonna do that. So that means whenever the IP address or whatever it is makes the request for the first time, then we set the expiry on the key to be 60 seconds. And then it'll stay that all the way up to, if this window expires, then your count gets reset. Otherwise, you just stay there, right? And you can also go ahead and say let expiry time, and what you can do if request is equal to 1 like this. Otherwise, what you can do, not really expiry time, but TTL. Otherwise, what you can do is set TTL to await redis.ttl and then IP. And then you can pass in the TTL like this. And you can also pass TTL right here, right? And, you can give this TTL right here. So now what you can do is basically, you can give TTL to 60 here instead of assigning it to this value, but you get the idea. Now you can go ahead and say right here, response, calls, and then also TTL. That is how much time there is left for this particular application to work. Now what you can do is go ahead and refresh this and hit on this. All right, so now let's just go ahead and try to hit API 1, and you can see we got a TTL of -1, which is not good because we are not clearing our Redis CLI. So let's just clear our Redis store and run node more again, hit refresh, hit API 1, and you can see we get TTL 60. Then on the next call, it's 57, 56. So it's expiring, it's going down. But if you take a look, if we go all the way to 20, now we start getting errors, right? Because now we are not executing this part. but we still see that TTL is about 50. It's 42 now. So it'll come down all the way to 60 or all the way to 0. And once it does, then your client will be able to make more requests again, right? So this code right here is now safe from more than 20 executions per minute, right? Now, of course, depending on your requirements, you can play around with this number 20 and 60 right here, depending on what you want. Maybe you want a per second, throttling, or maybe like per 10-minute or per hour throttling. It depends on you, but that's how you're going to do it, right? In a very simple way. You can see we have still 4 seconds to go. And now if we hit enter, you can see we got TTL 60 again, and it goes on and on, right? So that's one thing to go about. So yeah, that's pretty much it for this video in terms of how you can set up TTL. We will, in the next one, probably take a look at how we can clean this up a little bit. So that is all for this one. I'm going to see you in the next video really soon. Hey everyone, welcome back. And in this video, let's just go ahead and take a look at how we can create a middleware for our rate limiter, because this looks ugly to use and it's not really feasible as well. So let's just go ahead and actually just go ahead and do something like rate limiter.js, right? And this file will consist of a function right here, which we can use as a middleware. So first things first, what this would be is it will be a function which would be in the form of an express middleware. So rate limiter would probably look like request, response, and next. That's what express middlewares provide you. Request is this object which you get, response is this object, and next is basically a function which if you call, the next middleware in the chain will be called, otherwise it will not be called. So our functionality would remain more or less the same. So I'm just gonna copy and paste this whole thing right here, right? We will also get our Redis like this so that we have access to our Redis client. This will again become async. So we have a rate limiter right here, and we will finally say module.exports rate limiter. So we get the IP address first of all. We check the request by rate limiting, by incrementing it in Redis. We can see that if this thing happens, it's fine. Otherwise, this is it. Then what we can do is we can check, just copy out that logic and then make a little bit of modifications. So, we say if this is the case, then do this. Otherwise, just call next. That means just call the next route, right? Whatever it is. So with that being done, what we want to do is we want to make this rate limiter a little bit more flexible, in the sense that instead of doing all of this, what this rate limiter would do is it will actually return us a function itself, right? And I'm going to tell you why that is a good way to go about. All right, so now why I did that because this way we will be able to provide some of the features, some of the functionalities which might differ from API to API, right? And you don't really want to mess around with the actual core code. So let's say this is let's say a second window. Seconds window, not really a good name, but I'm bad at naming things. So there we go. And then let's say allowed hits. So these are the two parameters which are also required. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the seconds window right here and allowed hits right here, right? So what we are doing is basically making this dynamic in the sense that, hey, if your second windows expire, or if it does not expire and your allowed hits exceed that thing, then you're bad, right? And you can also set your TTL like this. So there we go. This looks good to me, at least. Let's just try to take a look at this and see if we can use it as a middleware. So I'm going to go ahead and import this rate limiter from this file, rate limiter, which is available, right? And now inside Express, I'm just going to put it like this, and I'm going to say, what we need to do. Seconds window is basically, let's say 10 for this, and allowed hits is 4, for example, right? And then we do something like this, or because this is not an endpoint, we're going to be doing this right here. All right, so now once we do that, hit refresh, what's going to happen now, Well, I think our application is crashing. That's why. Await Redis.increment is only valid in all right, looks like we are doing a little bit of problem here. First of all, we want to get rid of all of this. So your expensive function calculation goes here. And second of all, this should be async, not this one. I mean, you could keep that one async as well, but that's not required. So once we do that, what's going to happen is the following. So now if we go ahead and take a look at our index file, hit API 1, you're going to see, oh, and I made a big mistake. Can you guess what it is? These functions orders should be reversed. This should be actually here because the first call you make is actually with the arguments, right? Then this returns a function to you, which actually is an express middleware. So that is something which should not have happened on a live course, but you know, just to share failures along the way. That's how you learn, right? So function, request response next, and you can say rate limiter. This is your rate limiter function. So you call this function right here by these arguments. This returns you a middleware, which technically, if you know about this, is using closures to store these values, and that's how it happens. So once that is done, let's just go ahead and see if we are good to go. Yep, hit API 1, and we are still facing some errors. Request is not defined. So, all right, that's because, you know, we have removed some code. So we can use request.request, and we can inject this through the middleware. So I can just go ahead and say that, you know, before calling this request, and then I can just set it to request, right? So that's a little hack. Not really a hack, you know, Express middlewares modify the request object all the time, and then you can access that inside here, right? Like that. All right, so with that being done, we are closing enough on making sure that our API works just fine. So if I click on this, we still get another error, TTL is not defined, and that is again something we can hook into the request. So I won't really recommend doing this on the top level, but probably somewhere inside, you know, your own custom object somewhere, so that you just don't, you know, just populate the global scope of the request object. So now if I click on hit 1, you can see we have a, you know, small TTL, and we are now getting errors. So that's one thing. Another thing is now this solution is pretty much reusable across different APIs, right? So that's pretty cool. So you can have a seconds of 5 and allowed head of 2, or maybe like just 1. So you just want a single request happening at a 5-second interval. That's how you're gonna do it, right? So if I go ahead and refresh this again, hit API 2, you can see that, you know, we go ahead and do that. And of course, the first request we got is bad because we are not returning the correct values from the backend. That's why. So if I hit on this again, you can see we have a TTL of 5 now, and it errors out after one single request. So yeah, I mean, you can pretty much do that on API 3 as well. I hope you get the idea. And that's how you create a very simple rate limiter with Redis. So that is all for this video. In the next one, we'll be exploring some more fun stuff about Redis. We'll be seeing what is possible. I'm going to see you in the next video, and make sure you're attempting the challenges, the labs, doing it yourself as well as we go on in the course.